Let's begin. Mark Edmundson's book, Why Read? First chapter, Literary Life. Reading through a volume of modern poetry not long ago, I came upon some lines that seemed to me to concentrate a strong and true sense of what there is to gain from great writing. The lines were by William Carlos Williams, and they ran this way. "Look at what passes for the new," Williams wrote. "You will not find it there, but in despised poems. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Williams asserts that though all of us are surrounded all the time with claims on our attention, film, TV, journalism, popular music, advertising, and the many other forms that pass for the new, there may be no medium that can help us learn to live our lives as well as poetry and literature overall can. So right out of the gate, first paragraph, a very bold statement from Edmundson, where he's agreeing with the poet William Carlos Williams that with all of the media and all the entertainment and all of the information around us all the time, why are people still so miserable? Why are people still so lost and confused in this world? Maybe it's because the thing that's been available this whole time, poetry or literature in general, actually has the answers, and we just don't want to look at it. So he's going to make the case throughout this whole chapter, and of course through the whole book, that literary study, real reading, is a path for learning how to navigate the world and truly discover who we are meant to be or who we want to be. So big goals from Edmundson in this book. People die miserably every day for lack of what is found in despised poems, in literary artwork, in other words, that society at large denigrates. My own life and the lives of many others I've known offer testimony for what Williams has to say. Reading woke me up. It took me from a world of harsh limits into expanded possibility. Without poetry, without literature and art, I, and I believe many others too, could well have died miserably. It was this belief in great writing that 30 years ago made me become a teacher. Yet most of the people who do what I do now, who teach literature at colleges and universities, are far from believing Williams. Nearly all of them would find his lines overstated and idealizing. Many now see all of literature, or at least the kind of literature that's commonly termed canonical, as an outmoded form. It's been surpassed by theory or rendered obsolete with the passage of time. To quote Williams on the value of poetry without suitable condescension at the next meeting of the Modern Language Association would be to invite no end of ridicule. So a couple of things that students should know here. The word canonical is a really important word. And so discussing with those kids that it's not just literature. Other fields of study have canonical ideas or canonical texts in them. But in literature, when we say something is part of the canon, it means it's part of the accepted group of texts, books, films, whatever we're talking about when we're talking about literature, that have been deemed really important over time. Either they contain certain themes that have resonated over the decades and centuries, or it's by a particular author that has been prominent over a long period of time. The canon isn't necessarily set in stone. It can be updated and adjusted, and things we thought that were good can be removed over time, and things that we didn't recognize earlier on can be added. So the canon isn't this ossified set of texts where you have to know these and that's it. It's just a useful term that encompasses all of the works of art in this case that we kind of need to know. They're sort of important, and especially important if we're talking about the canon of Western culture or American culture. They're important for us to know that if we're going to be knowledgeable about our own culture, we have to know a lot about the canon, or at least something about the canon. It's funny here he mentions the Modern Language Association, because I used to be a part of the MLA for many years, and that organization, they'd always had some crazy ideas, and I agree, this is what they would have thought if you would have brought up Williams' idea about this transcendental nature of literature and shaping souls and stuff like this. They would have thought that's just too silly. But I dropped out of the MLA several years ago because they had gotten so crazy and so away from what good literary study and good theory and good English instruction and all of the stuff that we English scholars should be focusing on. They had gotten way off track with that and gotten too far down the path of weird theory stuff and political ideologies and stuff like that I had to remove myself. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. It was an organization that I don't like any longer. He continues, "Does everyone who teaches literature hold this dismissive attitude? Well, not quite, but those who are better disposed to literary art tend to an extreme timidity. They find it embarrassing to talk about poetry as something that can redeem a life or make it worth living, though they may feel these things to be true. Those few professors who still hold literature in high regard often treat it aesthetically. Following Kant, they're prone to remove literary art from the push and toss of day-to-day life. They want to see poems and novels as autonomous artifacts that have earned the right to be disconnected from common experience. One admires great literary works as aesthetic achievements, but on actual experience, they should have no real bearing at all. So the word aesthetically means just to focus on something that's beautiful or presented and put together in a very specific way. You're looking at just sort of the outside observable qualities of whatever it is you're looking at. Could be a piece of poetry, could be a building, could be a piece of art, could be a car, anything that you can see that you can have judgment about, whether it's beautiful or ugly, whether it looks nice and practical, or whether we're just really messy. That's what we mean when we're talking about things aesthetically. And Kant, the philosopher, he was in the mid to late 1700s, so he's an Enlightenment thinker. He kind of viewed, as Edmundson just alluded to there, that art should just be treated as something beautiful. And that's good. We should be looking for the beauty of art. But again, he kind of separated it from day-to-day existence. He said, for us to aim as high as we can as human beings, we should be looking at art as a pathway to beauty. And again, while that's true, Edmundson is going to argue, and I would agree with Edmundson, that, it can do so much more than that. It doesn't have to just be something beautiful that doesn't really affect our day-to-day lives, that it's just sort of this humanistic goal. Again, though it is that, it actually can play a role in our day-to-day lives. We just gotta find it, and we gotta have teachers who can explain it. And he says too many people in the English world, especially teachers, aren't doing that today. Other professors who still call themselves humanists are often so vague in their articulated sense of what great writing offers. It cultivates sensitivity, it augments imagination, it teaches tolerance, that their views are easily swept aside by the rigorous-sounding debunkers. Which is true. There's too many teachers out there who kind of speak in platitudes, or they just oversimplify and speak in these generalities about the benefits of literature without getting specific about, well, give me an example of how that story or how that poem could actually influence your life. A lot of English professors fall back on, well, it creates empathy. It's like, yeah, that's true, but how exactly? In what contexts would that be true? Give me an example. Give me an example from a story that showed up in your own life and that you learned from that story and you actually used it and tried it out and determined if it worked or not. Give us some specific examples. Many teachers don't really do that either because they don't fully believe in it, or they just don't focus on it enough, and they again, maybe not to the degree of Kant and other people who just view it aesthetically, but they just don't go that deeply into it. And that's a shame, because that's really what students would find useful, and that's what we teachers should be doing. Yet Williams is anything but vague. The most consequential poems offer something that is new, or one might say, truth, that makes significant life possible. Without such truth, one is in danger of miserable death, the kind of death that can come from living without meaning, without intensity, focus, or design. So out in the culture today, we have this tremendous, a lot of surveys are showing that there's a bit of a meaning crisis, that people don't know what the purpose of life is. We keep hearing depression and anxiety are at all-time highs. People are more medicated than ever before. People are immersing themselves in digital things and technological things that are not good for them. Why? Because they're just coasting through life because nothing matters to them. They're just like, well, I'll just go to the next thing because that's what will get me through the day. That's at least entertaining for a few minutes. But there's no substance there. There's no meaning. And so with our students today, we have to be even more vigilant in crafting meaning and guiding students toward what these great books can offer us about giving us a purpose and a direction for our lives. And many English teachers just don't do that. We get to a key point here. The moral of this book is that Williams has it right. Poetry, or literature in general, is the major cultural source of vital options for those who find that their lives fall short of their highest hopes. Literature is, I believe, our best goad toward new beginnings, our best chance for what we might call secular rebirth. So the word secular means not affiliated with religious ideas. And in religious ideas, the idea of rebirth is really important because one of the key components of having a faith, a religious faith, is the opportunity to continue to renew yourself, to improve, to aim at higher things that make you a better person, and in certain faiths, to achieve a destination even after you die. There is a rebirth even after death. So when we say that something is a secular rebirth, well, you take away the religious element of it, and he says, yeah, even if you don't have a particular religious faith, literature and the arts offers you a chance at rebirth because you can observe something in a story, in a poem, in a painting, in a song, in a film, whatever the art is, and it can change your worldview. It can awaken you to something new, and it can actually move you in a different path of your life and start a new adventure, start a new perspective. So there is a sense of rebirth. There's an opportunity to become someone slightly different if you actually engage with these great works of literature. However much society at large despises imaginative writing, however much those supposedly committed to preserve and spread literary art may demean it, the fact remains that in literature there abide major hopes for human renovation. What a great word, renovation, that we can constantly repair and improve our lives. I mean, what a great sense of hope for those who choose to just take in these pieces of great art. This book is addressed to teachers. That's just one group. We teachers of literature and of the humanities overall now often stand between our students and their best aspirations, preventing them from getting what literary art has to offer. With all the resources at hand to help our students change their lives for the better, and despite real energy and dedication, most of us still fail in our most consequential task. Purportedly guides to greater regions of experience, we've become guards on the parapets, keeping others out. The parapet is the part of the castle where, there's like the tower, and usually in times where people lived in castles, you'd have guards standing on the tower, and they would have their bow and arrow or whatever, and because they're elevated and they can see down, they're automatically protected from someone trying to attack up high. And so it's easy to keep people out if you're a guard on the top of the tower of a castle. And so he's saying, there's too many English teachers now who kind of make English so difficult because they're using fancy jargon and these just crazy literary theories that it really turns people away and it makes them feel like English and the literary arts aren't for them. They're like, oh, it's too complicated. Again, this stuff doesn't have any relevance to my life. It's just too weird, these ideas you're proposing. I don't want to be a part of that. And so English has actually pushed people away or kept people out of the kingdom, so to speak, when really we should be inviting more people in. And the way you invite more people in and make it more accessible is to make it more relevant for people's lives. And that's what Edmundson's going to try to do throughout this book. However, it's not just for teachers. This book is also written to students and potential students of literature, to all those who might dream of changing their current state through encounters with potent imaginations. You are invited to read over the shoulders of your teachers. You are invited, if need be, to supplant them. For much of what teachers can offer, you can provide for yourself. It is often simply a matter of knowing where to start. It's a matter of knowing what you might ask for and get from a literary education. Now, I believe in teachers and parents guiding students through it, because just like I'm doing for you here, I believe there often is some clarification needed and some further insight that someone who's an expert, or at least someone just more experienced, can provide these young students. But in a certain way, he is right as well, that if you're just willing as a student to be brave enough to crack open a classic work of literature, there's so much vital information for your life that you could get from it. And you could, in essence, teach yourself or have that author be teaching you. You can read Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Dickens or Hemingway or whoever, and they could be your teacher for a little while, at least through that story. And so literary study is great because it not only gives the opportunity for experts to guide people through it, which is what professors should have been doing, but even if you don't have a teacher at hand, that author of that text will be a form of teacher for you, as long as you're willing to learn something. In Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, there's a passage that gets close to the core of what a literary education should be about. The passage offers a deep sense of what we can ask from a consequential book. Proust speaks with the kind of clarity that is peculiarly his about what he hopes his work will achieve. In particular, he reflects on the relation he wants to strike with his readers. It seemed to me, he observes, that they would not be my readers, but readers of their own selves. my book being merely a sort of magnifying glass, like those which the optician at Cambrai used to offer his customers. It would be my book, but with it I would furnish them the means of reading what lay inside themselves. Cambrai is just a village that Proust often talks about in his novels because he's French, and that's where it's located. So that I would not ask them to praise me or to censure me, but simply to tell me whether it is really like that. I should ask whether the words they read within themselves are the same as those which I have written. And that's something I talked about with my students for many, many years. That's such a great line that he says, I don't want you to praise me or censure me. So, you don't have to tell me how great I am. You don't have to block me and ban my book because you think, it's the material's too sensitive for students to read. You don't need to do either of those things. I just want you to read it and then think about it for yourself or discuss it with other people and say, is what's going on in this book really like that? And so that's what we do with my students is we say, we're reading whatever piece of literature. It could be a full novel, it could be a short story, it could be a play, anything where human beings are doing things or feeling things and acting things out. We would constantly stop and go, is that how people actually are? Is what this author's version of this scene that they're writing, this plot they've created, is that how people actually act? Is that what you would do if you were in that situation? Is this world he or she has created really like that? And if so, great, there's probably something in there we can learn from it. If not, if the author is way off base and has created characters where you're like, they wouldn't actually do that, that guy wouldn't say that in that situation, that doesn't make any sense. Well, you can still discuss that too, and then use it as an example that doesn't exist in the real world, and maybe it's just for entertainment, maybe it's that we can kind of learn something negative from it, which is equally as useful as learning a model that's realistic. So you can learn from a text either way. And again, it doesn't mean we should be saying, well, this book is good, therefore I'm going to read it. Or that book is bad, therefore schools should ban it. It's like, how about just read it, because you're a free citizen, and determine for yourself, is this how the world actually is? That's a great test for students, especially older students who have started living in the world for a little while. What Proust is describing is an act of self-discovery on the part of his reader. Immersing herself in Proust, the reader may encounter aspects of herself that, while they have perhaps been in existence for a long time, have remained unnamed, undescribed, and therefore, in a sense, unknown. One might say that the reader learns the language of herself, or that she is humanly enhanced, enlarging the previously constricting circle that made up the border of what she has been. One might also say, using another idiom, one that has largely passed out of circulation, that her consciousness has been expanded. So what often happens in literature, and he's going to give examples throughout the whole book of this, is that when you're reading something that presents the world that you do recognize, but presents it in a new and interesting way, and you go, wow, I've never thought of it like that before. That is how the world is. And my understanding of people or situations or my own emotions for how I'm reacting to this story, they've changed. They've been updated. I'm now a slightly different person because I've had this new reading experience. And that's what literature is supposed to be about, is you're gaining access to all these worlds that these authors have created. And through them, you get a chance to experience a tiny sliver of what's going on in those stories. You can identify with those characters and go through in your own tiny way those actions. And through that process, learn something, not only about history or about philosophy or about this author or the ideas presented, you can actually learn about yourself. And you go, wow, I thought I felt this way about this idea. But now that I'm seeing it presented this way, I actually feel slightly different. My perception on that has changed. I'm a kind of a different person now. And so that's a very useful thing that we can constantly evolve and learn. And over the course of our life, not only become better people, but also kind of become different types of people, which could be a very good thing, especially because young people need to grow and develop. So the types of literature you take in are going to shape who you are. And so you should want to access as many opportunities to read as you possibly can. Proust's professed hope for his readers isn't unrelated to the aims that Emerson, who was a philosopher and author in the mid-1800s, a writer Proust admired, attributes to the ideal student he describes in his essay, The American Scholar. It's a good essay. You should go find it. It's available online. It's not hard to find. One must be an inventor to read well. As the proverb says, he that would bring home the wealth of the Indies must carry out the wealth of the Indies. There is then creative reading as well as creative writing. When the mind is braced by labor and invention, the page of whatever book we read becomes luminous with manifold illusion. Every sentence is doubly significant, and the sense of our author is as broad as the world. So this is what I talk about all the time, and I would constantly reiterate to my students, is within a text, there are references to potentially dozens, hundreds, thousands of other ideas and other texts. So it's really helpful to have the background knowledge, or at least the imagination to envision what those texts could be about if you haven't read them specifically, so that you can understand this text. After all, look at all the allusions that Edmundson has made, and we're only 3 pages into this book. He's talking about Proust, he's talking about Emerson, he's going to talk about Socrates shortly, and Shakespeare, and all these people. Well, you kind of need to know about those people so that when you read a certain book, then you can more deeply understand where the author was coming from. So these texts, they constantly are interwoven and building upon each other so that when you read something, you can play a part in that invention, in that reception of what the text is presenting. That you bring yourself to the text, and now you're a part of this broader conversation with not only the author, but also all the other authors that this author is referring to. And that's a very interesting conversation to be a part of, and that's what literature offers us. For Emerson, the reader can do more than discover the language of herself in great writing. Emerson's reader uses a book as an imaginative goad. It's like a stimulus, something prompting you. He can begin compounding visions of experience that pass beyond what's manifest in the book at hand. So it doesn't always have to be just very clearly laid out. It's like your imagination starts developing and expanding with all these different references that are built into each text. This presumably is what happened when Shakespeare read Holinshed's Chronicles or even Plutarch's Lives. These are major sources for the plays, yes, but in reading them, Shakespeare made their senses doubly significant and the sense of their authors as broad as the world. So those are historians who wrote about famous figures from the past. So we know that Shakespeare was a pretty bright guy. He was constantly referencing these people and events from history within his own plays. So even though they were, many of them, imaginative, completely creative plays, built in them were these references to the history and the culture. So if we understand that, now we get double the power out of the reading of a Shakespeare play. Proust and Emerson touch on 2 related activities that are central to a true education in the humanities. The first is the activity of discovering oneself, as in great writing. The second, and perhaps more important, is to see glimpses of a self, and 2, perhaps a world, that might be a self in a world that you can begin working to create. Reading, Proust says in a circumspect mood, means very careful. Reading is on the threshold of the spiritual life. It can introduce us to it. It does not constitute it. So again, it doesn't mean that the things we read are going to give us all the answers. They're often just going to point in a direction that leads you to come up with some new ideas, to examine yourself more closely, and then to kind of reinvent yourself or again, be reborn in some very small way based on your new knowledge, based on the experiences you think you might want to have in the future, and so you might start heading down a different direction. Proust and Emerson point toward a span of questions that matter, especially for the young, though they count for us all, too. They are questions that should lie at the core of a liberal arts education. Who am I? What might I become? What is this world in which I find myself? How might it be changed for the better? So these are the ultimate questions of life, and this is the ultimate questions of education. And yet, too much of education now is, I need to go learn this thing so that I can go get this job someday. It's like, yeah, is that the big question you're really tackling? Yeah, we all have to learn stuff to go get a job. We get it. We got to earn money and we got to put a roof over our head. Understandable. But I think education could be bigger than that. Real education, especially a literary education, is not intended for you to go get a job someday. In the big scheme of eternity, who cares about that? What really matters for our place in the world is, who are you as a person, as a moral being who's going to make choices every day on what to believe in and what path you should follow in life and how you're going to treat your family and how do you fall in love and, how should I spend my free time doing something productive to serve other human beings rather than just be wasting it frivolously? Like, these are deep questions. And this is what a literary education can provide. And as he said earlier, too many teachers are kind of just ignoring that element and either going to, again, something so obscure that no one can understand it, or it's just not interesting, or they skip over it entirely and go, well, we don't need all these books. We need to be training you for the job market. It's like, Edmundson doesn't believe that, and neither do I. And again, that's what this book is about is, well, why read? It's because it offers us so much more that could help shape our lives if we just look at these books and ask ourselves these tough questions as we read. We ought to value great writing preeminently because it enjoins us to ask and helps us to answer these questions and others like them. It helps us to create and recreate ourselves, often against harsh odds. So I will be talking here about the crafting of souls in something of the spirit that Socrates did. This discussion, Socrates said, referring to one of his philosophical exchanges, is not about any chance question, but about the way one should live. And I often think about this with parents. If you're a parent or a teacher who's listening to this, like, what do you want for your child? Yeah, I know you want them to go get a job someday. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, you want them to be self-sufficient and, able to pay their own bills. Fine. That's all good. But you probably want something deeper than that. When you think about Socrates' question about the way one should live, you're wondering, how do I want my child to live? Today, next year, when he's 50, what kind of life is he or she going to live? That's what I'm training him or her to be right now. When I'm teaching my child, I'm training him or her to become a certain type of person. Yes, one type of person is to go get a job and support yourself someday. That's fine. But there's so much more than that. And that's what a real education provides. And I hope through this discussion of this book, we can help those parents out there or classroom teachers get students to be on a path towards becoming people we are proud of. Not just as employees, not just as cogs in the market, but as genuine human beings who have value and contribute something useful in service to the world and ending being loving and generous to the people around them. And that's what literature can do. I think that the purpose of a liberal arts education is to give people an enhanced opportunity to decide how they should live their lives. So I'll be talking about the uses of the liberal arts for the conduct of life. I will be describing the humanities as a source of truth. I'll be asking teachers to think back to the days when reading and thinking about books first swept them in and changed them, and asking them to help their students have that kind of transforming experience. A reader removed from the debates about the liberal arts that have been going on over the past few decades would, on hearing the aims for this book, perhaps smile at how superfluous and unoriginal they may seem. Of course, universities should present humanities students with what Matthew Arnold called the best that is thought and known, and give them the chance to reaffirm or remake themselves based on what they find. To the charge of lacking originality, I plead guilty. I have already cited Proust and Emerson. This book will be filled with the wisdom of many others, often similarly well known. But as to my argument being superfluous, I can assure you that it is not the case. Universities now are far from offering the kind of experience that Alan Bloom, a writer with whose work I have something like a love-hate relationship, is describing when he observes that the true liberal education requires that the student's whole life be radically changed by it, that what he learns may affect his action, his tastes, his choices, that no previous attachment may be immune to examination and hence reevaluation. Liberal education puts everything at risk and requires students who are able to risk everything. Alan Bloom wrote a famous book called The Closing of the American Mind back in the 80s that caused quite a stir in the culture, and he was kind of criticizing academia for getting away from what liberal education should be. And I wonder if he might be overstating a little bit where he says, your whole life should be radically changed by it. I don't know if it needs a radical change. If you're already on a good path and the things you learn just affirm that you're on the right path or just give you subtle tweaks to improve your direction in your life, that's probably good enough. But his question here at the end about risking everything is a vital one, and one I often ask my college students, where I would say, look, why are you actually here? Why are you in this class? Yeah, it's to get a credit. Yeah, it's to get a diploma. Yeah, it's to get a job. Fine. But what are you willing to risk? Because just going through that process of signing up for a class and doing the homework and then getting a diploma and then going to get a job, that's not risking a lot. You're just kind of going through the motions. A real education is putting something on the line. And what he's going to argue is, and what Bloom is sort of alluding to here, is you got to put your whole life on the line. Everything you think about the world is up for debate. There is nothing that should be completely sacred to you that is not open to possible influence in your education. Even the things you believe in strongest, let's say your religious faith, well, a true education would put that on the table too, and actually challenge it and poke at it and go, do I actually believe this? Have I studied enough scholars? Have I listened to all sides of this debate where even the thing I value the most in this world, I'm willing to say, yeah, I'm not sure. Let's re-examine it. Let me see if there's something new here that I need to know about. If you're not willing to do that, then why are you getting an education? Other than to go through the motions to get a job? Well, we can aim higher than that. We can create better, smarter people than just future employees. So that's what I would ask my students, like, what are you risking by reading this poem, by reading this play, by watching that film? What belief about the world and about human beings are you willing to put on the line and take a closer look at and maybe realize, wow, I was wrong about that all along. I thought people were like this. Turns out the more I've thought about it and studied it from all these scholars and stories and people with all this experience, I'm learning that that's not how people are. I better fix my view so that I understand reality better. Well, that's what a real education is. And again, I talked about that at the college level, but you can start at the elementary school level and start challenging your kids, your students with everything and constantly giving them opportunities to reevaluate, reshape who they think they are and what they think the world is. Because the more practice they get, the smarter they're going to be and the more moral they're going to be and just the better human beings they're going to be. So heavy stuff here, but incredibly useful from a true liberal education standpoint. By this definition, true liberal education barely exists in America now. That's true. It is almost nowhere to be found. We teachers have become timid and apologetic. We are not willing to ask the questions that matter. Into the void that we have created largely by our fear, other forces have moved. Universities have become sites not for human transformation, but for training and for entertaining. He's going to talk about both of those as we go. Unconfronted by major issues, students use the humanities as they can. They use them to prepare for lucrative careers, they acquire marketable skills, or they find in their classes sources of easy pleasure. They read to enjoy, but not to become other than they are. So there's a lot of students like, well, that book's boring. I don't want to read it. Or I will read it because it looks fun. Or I enjoyed that book because it was fun. Not because it offered something meaningful for your life. It just happened to be enjoyable. And we've got to look deeper and we got to train our students to look deeper in the literature that they are encountering. You must change your life, says Rilke's Sculpture of Apollo to the beholder. So says every major work of intellect and imagination. But in the university now, as in the culture at large, almost no one hears. So in any form of education, and especially one that's based on reading, you're going to become a different person. Maybe not dramatically different. You're not going to start, doing things that are wildly different than who you are. But your life is constantly going to be updated. You're constantly growing. And especially when you're young, you are going to be a different person. It's inevitable that at age 10, by the time you're 20, you're a different person. And by the time you're 40, you're a different person. By the time you're 80, you're a different person. Again, doesn't mean your morals have changed or your personal character, but like you view the world differently. You have a different lens at those stages. So getting prepared for that by hearing from all sorts of really smart people through reading is a way to start imagining what type of person you want to be at those different increments of your life. And that's the point of all of education. Prepare yourself for the type of person you want to be or who you think you want to be. And start trying it out. The way you try out those ideas, they're already written down. Just read about them.